call this meeting to order, and we've had the pledge. Next item is approval of minutes. Any comments or anything?
I do. So it's really hard to do minutes for discussion and really capture everything. And even though that's what our workshop is, purely discussion. So my opinion is that it would be easiest if the minutes just conveyed who was in attendance, what was the topic, and then instead of going through all the different discussion points, because there was a lot more to it, and it'd just be impossible to record all of that in minutes. And then just saying, you know, what the next action was that, like, we agreed, for example, in the last one, to schedule further workshops to discuss this issue. And probably also to reflect the public comment, make sure that, like, citizen Sean Flaherty's comment is included, and then when we adjourn. Because, for example, Lance had a lot to say. You know, I had a lot more to say that you can't really convey unless you explain it all, you know, but it's all still discussion, and we weren't making any actions. So my personal preference would be to just have it really simple. And it keeps us kind of out of trouble, because otherwise I would get into the point of like, well, yeah, if I said that, I kind of said that, but that's not what I meant, and I went on to talk 20 minutes about something else, you know what I mean? If that makes sense. And you can't really do that well. I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's just a really hard thing to do in minutes, to convey discussion.
Drew, how does city council do it when they have work sessions?
Sorry, I had a hard time hearing you there.
How does the city council do it when they had work sessions? I remember how they did it way back when I was on, but now what do they do when they have a work session and before their meeting or whatever?
In the way of minutes?
Well, to what detail are discussions reported on and recorded in the minutes?
I would say it's kind of a hybrid between what you're talking about and what you're seeing right there. So,
Yeah.
You know, minutes are very difficult to take, and so you know, we'll do our best to tone it down a little bit and capture the essence. It's just really hard in a long discussion. You do try to, you know, we're trying to be as open and you know, informational as possible, and honestly, the tape is the best way.
Yeah.
So, just trying to give the idea what happened.
Yeah, I guess what I'm struggling then with is, I don't know. Well, I don't know how you guys feel. I mean, but, because.
Okay, comment noted. Anybody else have any other comments?
Yes, I'd just like to say that I think it really summed up my feelings in the little paragraph about me, so I'm happy with what was said, that's all.
Okay, because I don't think that conveys anything about what I was trying to say, and then it also doesn't have Lance's comments either.
Any other comments on the minutes?
Yeah, Mr. Commission Chair and Commissioners, on that, it's a really tough one to do, and perhaps Cheryl on this one, or next month when we have the same discussion again, we can try to just summarize it and refer to the recording on it. You know, until they're making a decision on it, the discussion is just that, you know, and we can pretty much sum it up by saying, we had a discussion on this.
Yeah, because I don't think I stated here anything that I'm being paraphrased. I mean, yes, but I didn't say the only thing that could be done by the Planning Commission is to regulate the code, because that's not our job. So, like, I think that was, like, maybe if I said that, I meant to say that in the context of, like, the code is the only regulation that we evaluate certain things on, but we're not regulating the code. You know, you see what I mean? Like, that meaning is way different than anything that I meant. And so I definitely know that, because we don't regulate, you know.
Well, Mr. Commission Chair and Commissioner, if maybe we could amend that sounds like you're making a motion to amend that, and if so, we can certainly do that and resubmit those for next meeting. Okay.
Now, if we do that, then how, you know, other than just to strike whatever it says that I said out, because I don't feel like that do we want to just leave it? I mean,
Well, we'll have Cheryl look at it.
Okay.
And come to a
And-
consensus on it. And
Okay.
I think that for this evening, Mr. Chair, if you find it friendly, just don't approve the minutes tonight.
I'm fine with approving them, so,
I would vote no, and I would really not want to be known to have said that quote, because that's not what I meant.
okay, we'll just move the approval of the minutes to next meeting then.
Thank you.
First item of business then is a public hearing on a conditional use permit. Tracy, are you giving us a highlight on this? Didn't have a name after the info.
Yes, I will present. Good evening, commissioners. So this is a proposal for multifamily apartment building on a 9.17 acre lot on the north side of Empire Street in the Chisholm Minor subdivision. This is a redesign of the previously approved project from 2021. It was 1 year ago that some of you were on the commission when this came through last time. This is basically a redesigned project, and our land use code pretty much would require this to be resubmitted because the approval is dependent upon the architectural scale and design. So this proposal is for 42 units, a leasing office and amenities for the residents, including a commercial kitchen. The property is zoned R2, and apartments in R2 are a conditional use permit. I will say now, this zoning district does not require the site plan review, so they will not be coming back for a formal site plan review unless they request that, which they may do that if they choose. Otherwise, this is going to go straight to a building permit, and so at that time, we would basically make sure it met all the standards to a T at that time without having the hearing processes. This is a 3-story building, and each unit requires 3,000 square feet of land. There's 42 units, and that requires 126,000 square feet, and the lot is 399,445 square feet. So this exceeds the required acreage for this number of units. Setbacks in this zoning district are 20 in the front and 7 in the side and rear, and the location of the structure exceeds the setbacks. This project the building meets the height limits, but it will be close, and they will need to ensure that at the time of building permit that from grade to the highest pitch of the roof, it does meet the height requirement of 35 feet. And again, that will need to be verified at building permit. And the lot coverage is less than the 50% maximum. So the project meets all of the area standards for R2 zone. The proposal shows landscaping, and this will need to be fleshed out when they submit a site plan. But again, as they're showing it, and you may be considering it as part of the conditional use application, they do need to be cognizant of that. They are providing 2 spaces per unit at 84 spaces, and that meets the land use code for apartments. They will need to meet city engineer approval for the dumpster, and this is a conditional of approval. It's not something that it's achievable, so we've made it a condition. They need to do that at the time of the building permit. They are proposing a 6-foot-tall interior courtyard fence, and because the fence is interior and surrounds a courtyard and it's not on the front lot line, staff felt that this was a gray area with regards to the front height limit of a fence, which would be 4 feet unless the Planning Commission were to grant a special exception. So if you agree that that particular location of the fence does not trigger that review, I just want to make sure that's on the record. If you believe it needs to have a special exception, then you can kind of approve it through this application or require them to come back and get the special exception for that. The CUP criteria, criteria number 1, this is a mix of uses, and it's a transition area with some commercial and public uses, as well as an apartment complex right next door. So staff feels that this is a compatible proposal with the neighborhood, and there were no concerns from the city engineer or public works, so the circulation plan for this is appropriate. Condition number 2, the residential areas in the interior of the lot and provides some landscaping, which should provide some visual buffering, and there is adequate pedestrian and vehicular circulation. The conditional use permit criteria number 3, no accessory structures are proposed. And conditional use permit criteria number 4, there are public services that exist for this proposed structure, and there shouldn't be a burden on public services. And they are proposing off-street parking, so again, that should meet the criteria. Criteria number 5, maintenance will need to be performed by the applicant, and this is something that would be required by our property maintenance code for the city. Criteria number 6, hours of operation does not pertain to this project because it's residential. It does meet the parking requirements, and if they choose to get a sign, they will need to get a sign permit that meets the land use code, and that's a separate application and review. And the other requirements appear to be met and can be met through the building permit process. There are no significant concerns that were raised by agencies, and any of the ones that were listed in the staff report can be addressed at the time of building permit and typically would be addressed at the time of building permit, such as the backflow prevention device. And so with that, staff recommends approval with the conditions as listed in the staff report.
Okay, thank you. This time I'd open the public hearing since it's on the agenda. Anyone to speak to or against, or for or against, I guess, please use the microphone over there and state your name and address. And I know we had discussion on this a while back. Is the only thing different is the fence in the middle? Is that the?
It's slightly fewer units, and if you do recall the last proposal, there was, I think it was 4 structures. There was 4 separate buildings in a circle with a courtyard in the center of that circle. And then there was, a lot more, the parking, I believe, was on one side of the project, and so the parking right now is moved to the front. It's more or less like a big kind of, I don't know, it's more rectangular in nature. It's one building instead of, I think it was 4 separate buildings. It might have just been 3. So it's architecturally different shape. I think
Okay.
the style's probably not terribly different, but.
Yeah, I'm sitting here looking at it now. Yeah, that seems to, I seem to recall that it was going to be all around it, so. Okay, with that comment of mine, open to the public to come up and, you got to push
There we go.
there, thank you.
My name's Houston Frizzell. I live at 506 Amanda Lee Lane, right next to the project. I called down to planning, and unfortunately I didn't, I was pretty much told that it was going to be the same design that we had last year, so I haven't seen the updated design. My biggest concern last time, there were a few concerns, obviously we'll get into that, but one of my biggest concerns was the way that the driveway was going to be angled right out my backyard. My ask was, could that just be moved so that it's not angled right at my yard? Just move it over towards the east, a few feet or so, just so that we don't have that. My concern was that, okay, it was going to be a bunch of one-bedroom apartments. You're saying it's less units now. I don't know if they're all one-bedroom apartments or what it is. We know that if it's a bunch of one-bedroom apartments, that's going to be the party house. So that was our concern last year when I brought this up. My concern was, okay, somebody gets liquored up, they get in a fight, they come shooting out of the driveway, they miss, they land in my yard. Okay, I'm not okay with that. Obviously, I'm not okay with the whole project. I know anything that comes in here, it's going to check all of the right boxes, it's going to get approved, it's going to be sent on down the road. That's just the way the city seems to work. The Pinion Project seems to have their hand out all year as a nonprofit, looking for donations, looking for, toys for kids, this and that. Now all of a sudden they want to get into the real estate business. Whatever, it is what it is. I don't really love the idea. I don't want it right next to me. That's my concern, that if you've got a bunch of one-bedroom apartments, it's going to be the party house. There's going to be crime. There's going to be, who knows, drugs, alcohol, you name it. I could go on, but the staff has already made their recommendation. I do have a lot of concerns with it. I would like to see some changes, like I said, as far as the driveway on the west end of the property. And making sure that it is family-friendly. The Pinion Project tries to promote themselves as promoting family and children. A bunch of one-bedroom apartments wasn't gonna do that. If it's gonna go up, I wanna see families there. I don't wanna see a bunch of crime there. For the most part, the Cortez apartments right next door aren't a problem, but again, the police were out there again last night. So diminished property value is something we're gonna have to face. You know, this is the house that we chose for our family. It was a really good location, great views, a lot of wildlife, things like that that are gonna be going away. But it is what it is. That's what I've got. If you have any other questions, I'd be more than happy to respond. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We don't have the drawing up there, but based on the drawing, the entryway comes straight off Empire is what it looks like. Anybody else?
Just for your clarification, these are 1, 2, and 3-bedroom apartments, just so you know. It's a mix of all three.
Hi, my name is Alicia Hammett, and I'm with Shopworks Architecture on behalf of Blue Line and Pinion Project for this conditional use permit. And so we did, the mix of units are a mix of 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units, so there's 14 of each type of unit. So this will truly accommodate families. The majority of units are 2 and 3-bedroom units. We did lower the mix. I think it was 50 before, and we're at 42 now. And so a lot of that had to do with the budget. So we had to do redesign based on the budget, and that's why we're back here, and we're hoping that we'll be able to get funded by the Colorado Housing Finance Authority in this next round. And so we need this conditional use permit in place prior to our application on February 1st. So we're here to answer any questions you may have or concerns. The access point is where it's at for safety and for fire life safety. So that's why the access point is where it is on the plan. If we're willing to work with the city and with any review agencies on a safe access location, if that should be a condition of approval. But just wanted to say I'm here in support of the project and happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Any questions for her while she's up there? Anybody? Go ahead.
I have a question. There's some of the uses listed as leasing office. Is that just going to be in support of the operation of the residences there?
Yes.
And then I don't see parking designated for that specifically.
That's correct. So the leasing office is for just the apartments in that unit, or in the building, which is pretty typical for any apartment building. And then there are not necessarily designated spaces for leasing. We could do that with signage at a later time.
I guess my point is that usually in our parking calculations, it's a square footage basis or a per unit basis. And I think for office space, it's square footage. You have to have X number of parking spaces per square foot of office space. So while there's enough parking spaces to meet the residential requirements, it doesn't appear to have been included for the office space.
We believe that the leasing and office space is a supportive use to the multifamily use. Is that
it
correct,
is, but it's
Tracy? So it wouldn't be considered, it doesn't have the same kind of operation as like an office space would.
I know, but I don't know that we distinguish that in our land use code.
I think technically you could require 1 space per, I think it's 300 or 400 square feet.
Okay. I mean, I'm not, I already feel like our parking requirements are excessive sometimes. So, I mean, to me though, when I'm looking at the requirements, I guess that I want to make sure that the office calculation is considered so that we're not setting a precedent. Or if we are, that it's a precedent that we are aware that we're setting.
I think you have 2 choices. One is to require a special exception for not requiring that, or to ask them to add the however many spaces for however many square feet.
How many spaces are there now?
84.
And what would the minimum be?
For the apartments, it's 84.
Right, but how much is the office space square footage?
The leasing amenity is 4,500 square feet.
4,500?
The whole amenity area, but how much is like the actual,
Office area?
yeah. Because I don't think we would be requiring it for the amenities, because that's part of the.
No, that's more like common area to me. Like the amenity would be your residential common area. And
Yeah,
then
that's a
that
pretty
would
big office,
trigger it.
4,500 square feet.
Right. No, that's not what that is. Unless you're saying the office is thrown into the area and it's not a separate use.
We, in our building matrix, it looks like those are lumped together, so we would have to get back to you on the actual square footage of the actual, just the offices themselves. We're treating that whole area of the building as one use currently. So we would need to get back to you on that square footage. I don't actually have that calculated
Okay.
out.
Well, I guess that would be a discussion as to whether we want to just grant an exception to that if the office is just administrative to the leasing of the, but, then where's the employee going to park?
Yeah, or make that an additional condition at the end, that there's a requirement needs to be met for
Yeah, it
office
does
space.
look like they could push this loading area further north and add a couple spaces right there.
Yeah,
How many employees will be on premises? For the kitchen and renting and everything else?
That's a good question for Kelly with the Pinion Project. You want to come up here and answer that? Thanks.
I think the office that you're speaking of would be rental, and so the property management team would have a space by appointment only. So it's not going to be a full-time staffed office for that purpose. If there were any supportive services that were happening for the residents, Pinion staff would be back and forth between main building and that building. So I don't foresee a time where there's going to be permanent employees in the building 24 hours a day. It would be 1 or 2 employees per time during business hours. But the rental piece would just be as needed by appointment.
Am I to understand there's a kitchen on premises?
There's a kitchen for resident use. It's not a commercial kitchen that will be used for any other purposes. It's for families and community events within the residence of the complex itself.
And then will there also be custodial staff or other folks on premises?
There will be custodian staff, maintenance staff, that kind of staff that would come in and out of the building, yes.
So if there's 2 spots per apartment, where will all these custodial folks park?
So with this, with most affordable housing developments, they are significantly overparked because the cost burden of a car. I know in rural communities or in communities like this, we can assume that each family will have at least 1 car, which is adequate for how many spaces that we're providing, but we don't assume that it's going to be 2 vehicles per family because this is an affordable housing development. And so we feel that there will be spaces for staff to park within that 84-car parking lot. I think the other reason why we met the minimum code requirement for parking is that parking is extremely expensive to build. It's about $15,000 per stall to build at grade, which is a huge cost, and we'd rather spend more money on the building itself for residents and their families than to build parking. Obviously, parking is important, and we want people to be able to have a place to park at home. We feel like we are meeting that just based on data that we've seen from developments that we've done.
I understand that, but if you have the amenity room and you have this kitchen and people are going to have gatherings there, Perhaps it'll be people who do not live on the premises who will be coming there as well, and I don't know where those folks are gonna park. They're not gonna park along Empire. So you're inviting other folks in by having this meeting room, plus rental staff, custodial staff, what have you. So it seems like it's under parking spaced.
At the end of the day, we have a land use code that tells us how many parking spaces we're supposed to have. It's very black and white, in my opinion. So we have a total amount of square footage, we have a square footage requirement, a number of parking spaces for the square footage, and that's that. I mean,
Right,
it's a
but-
matter of opinion whether it's over-parked or under-parked. That's why we have a land use code. The land use code makes the decision for us, and if it meets the land use code as the land use code is written, then it's, in my opinion, pretty black and white, which at this point it does. Now, I understand what, Becky is saying in regard to there's kind of a different functions of use between the office and the residential space, right? I understand that, which, Tracy, what's the difference in the square foot requirement for office space versus quote-unquote residential?
It's 1 space per 300 square feet for offices and 2 spaces per unit, whether it's 1 bedroom or 3 bedroom. So it's always our house. Each dwelling unit is 2 spaces.
Yeah.
So, you assume that the residents are using the laundry room, they're playing the ping pong, they're gonna have guests, just like whether you have the amenity space or not. So, that's the conundrum with apartments.
I guess that's what I'm stuck with, is the code language itself, is that because there is supposed to be a certain percentage per designated office space, and since the proposal mentions office, even if it's a lease office, it's my understanding that we would need to require or grant a special exception, one of the two, to making that requirement for office space parking. And we don't know how many square feet the offices have, so that's something that, well, seems kind of incomplete. I have a question about, so I guess it's just, how do you guys want to handle that?
What have we done in the past?
Have a what?
What have we done as,
Or
in the past?
I don't know of a situation like this in the past.
Does the Calkins development have office space included in that?
It does. I don't recall the exact, what happened with that.
Okay.
That project went
'Cause-
through a lot of iterations, and the last one, Neva reviewed more than me, so I don't remember. But
That's like the only thing I can imagine that's both like administrative, you have this office function in the square footage designated area, plus you have residential units. I'm not being a stickler about it, I'm just bringing it up because it's something I have discomfort with and feel like we need to figure out how to address, because it's something I noticed.
So kind of, to summarize, there's 84 units, and the land use code says there needs to be 2 parking spots, or 42 units, and they need 2 parking spots per unit, and they got 84, but anything else, like for visitors or office or whatever, there aren't any parking spots. Is that a good summary?
Tracy, I don't know how to want to phrase this correctly. Since we are just here to approve or not approve the conditional use permit, wouldn't the parking spaces and the office square footage be determined when the site plan is produced? Wouldn't that be the procedure? I mean, obviously, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but to approve the site plan, the planning department and engineering department, to approve the site plan, they would also have to approve the parking spots in the number of parking spots in the places where it's available, right? Correct?
typically, you would get more into the weeds at the site plan review. And this is more of the concept, and that they could
Right.
fit all of the standards onto the site. I mean,
Right, but since we're not seeing the site plan as it's going to be in a year, or whenever the building starts, isn't discussion and relevance on this vote more to just the use of the property, not not the technical things that you're looking for? Wouldn't that come when the site plan is produced or is submitted?
I mean, if you're concerned about parking, then I think you would want to make sure they could meet that standard at the conditional use
But
permit.
if we added onto the motion to approval of the site, of the conditional use permit, and included language that stated that the site plan will have to follow the zoning code, the planning and zoning code, as far as parking spaces, numbers, and for square footage in the office or whatever, would that solve the problem and get more to what we're here to do?
You could add a condition that they will provide a floor plan with specific square footage of the office space, and then accommodate that with additional parking, would be my recommendation for a more specific condition.
Right. Okay,
Yeah.
now can I ask one more question?
Mhm.
And maybe you don't know, when this is put in the parking lot in this, on the site, is the plan to drain towards Empire, or is the plan to drain towards Carpenter? Or is there a plan?
So I don't know yet because we haven't engineered this plan yet.
Okay,
So
and that's understandable.
Yeah, so.
I just wanted to point out that we, last month we approved the add-on for Access Health, which included a lot of parking, in fact, extra parking, and it basically in the same area, and I'm assuming it will drain towards Empire since that's the natural slope of the land. I'm just curious, if there's been any consideration, and instead of draining it towards Carpenter, or maybe purposefully draining it towards Carpenter. I don't know. I'm certain that when the site plan comes and comments are made at city council or whatever, that could probably be addressed then. Is that a correct assumption, Tracy?
So drainage would be handled at that site plan review
Yeah.
stage. That's a city engineer's, there's like a historic drainage that you don't want to screw with too much and just start draining in a different direction. So that it's going to be based on the natural drainage and how they accommodate it, so it doesn't increase flow to other properties. So they have to contain the drainage on the lot
Right.
at a historic level.
I'm just slightly concerned of if there would be damage, if it drains, all that stuff, that the parking lot debris, oil, dust, and other stuff that's road debris, draining it into Carpenter would be a bad thing, or would funneling the water in one place be a better place? It's just a concern I had, and I'm sure the city engineer would consider that. So those are the questions I have. That's all I have.
Okay.
And there's state requirements regarding drainage too, and so we would have to comply with all local and state regulations regarding stormwater. There's some really significant regulations around stormwater management.
Tracy, I have a question. I'm a little confused. Will this come back before us again or not? It will not. So whatever we do tonight is our only shot at it. Thank you.
I've got a couple comments and one quick question for y'all. In regard to stormwater and drainage, obviously when you're designing parking lots, again, there's state statute that you have to go by. You can't let water go off of it. A lot of times it'll go into catch basins, things of that nature. So there's there's a stormwater management plan that will be tied to this project.
I assume.
I'm 100% certain. Catch, gutter, spill, gutter grades, all that sort of stuff. That there's city staff, there's staff in place to manage that. Do you have any idea how big the office is going to be? By chance, the leasing office? Are we talking like a one-room?
Probably just one office, 1 or 2 offices max.
Okay.
Most of the space are for amenity space for the residents.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to, again, this is conceptual, right? So you don't know the size,
That's correct.
right? One would assume that a 15 by 15 room would be pretty big,
Probably, yes.
right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's 225 square feet. It's going to require one lot, I mean, we're making a mountain out of a molehill here. I mean, I think, I understand where you're coming, I get it 100%, but I think that,
To stick to what the code says, and it
I
does
agree.
say that we are, parking is a site criteria that we have the ability to comment on, so I'm not pulling
Sure.
this out of my head.
no.
And I
I'm-
also agree, like, I think it's insane, but it's what the code says.
Sure.
I don't like it, but that's all.
I have a question. In the first sentence of your application, you say the Pinion Apartments will be new affordable housing. How are we to guarantee that that's going to remain affordable? Is there something written into the deed, or how do we know this will be affordable housing down the road?
I'm going to bring up Gabby with Blue Line Development to answer that question.
Hi, Gabrielle Masucci with Blue Line Development, Missoula, Montana. So this project will remain affordable for at least 10 years through the LIHTC program that we will apply for, the Colorado Low Income Housing and Tax Credit program. And this is how we fund these projects. It provides most of the capital that we need by selling the tax credits to investors. And so through that, there's program compliance, and it guarantees affordability.
Can you tell me what that is? Is that like 80% of the normal rent, 50% of normal rent? How do you define affordable?
For this project, it would be for people making up to 30% of the area median income.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a lot more questions, just for my own information.
Sure.
I'm not necessarily getting down on you. I just have a lot of questions to
Absolutely.
clarify in my own head. Okay. Anybody else?
In regard to the fence, so the fence, you said is listed at 6 feet tall, right?
That's correct.
And in our land use code, it's 4 feet tall is the maximum? And
In the front yard.
in the front yard?
Yeah, and that's it's kind of the interpretation there is what, we're talking about, not an exterior fence, but one that's like interior.
So is there any language in the land use code that speaks to why a 4-foot fence is allowed and a 6-foot fence is not?
I don't think our code gives great purpose statements on that, but philosophically, it's not an uncommon rule in the front yard. And again, if you were to look at this 20-foot setback, I'm going to keep talking just to make Becky squirm more.
I know.
So if you have a 20-foot front yard setback and this fence is past that, I mean, I didn't write that in the staff report, but I just want to put a finer point on that. It's not even in that 20-foot setback, so I'm just going to throw that out there.
Can I just blather for a second? A couple of things. Well, the first thing is, I think what Tracy was asking in the staff report, the applicant is saying, we're considering this a front yard fence. Now, if you look at the site plan, the fence is behind the parking lot. And what I'm interpreting staff was asking is this really a front yard? It is behind the parking lot. And so technically, like, the front yard would be in between the parking spaces and the sidewalk, not in between, like, to the street, to Empire. So this doesn't even seem to be a front yard in the traditional, or, stands. So
And
it
that's,
wouldn't be
Gotcha.
required to have that 4-foot max. The philosophical notion of 4 feet is that your front yard's a transition between public and private space. And so higher fences tend to block that out and make that transition really harsh and kind of are kind of an affront to like that whole concept of, you know, a neighborhood that feels more welcoming and open. So that's why most communities have restrictions on fence height in the front yard to maximum of 4, so that it's not like this big wall of China as you drive down the street, and that there's kind of a transition, and it's kind of a regular development standard, generally speaking.
That makes sense. So our technical definition of a front yard per the land use code is the 20-foot setback?
Usually, yeah.
Okay.
Do you know what kind of fence this is gonna be?
I think the fence material is to be determined. The intent of the fence is so that children have a safe place to play and don't run into the parking lot. And that's why we're asking for a taller fence, and specifically there at the courtyard, so families can feel good about their children having a safe place to play.
Okay.
I realize it's a conceptual rendering, but it looks to me like it's a standard privacy fence.
So what I'm hearing is that whether it's 4 or 6 feet, the code is nebulous, it doesn't matter.
We think,
That's okay.
do we think it's okay that it's not really where the fence is located? It sounded like in the staff report, staff was asking that we kind of go on record to say that a 6-foot fence in this location is okay.
I have no problem with the taller fence, just to go on record.
Do you need a formal motion on that, or just approving it and not calling it out as a condition?
I
think
would
if-
say it's not even an item. Oh, is that what you said?
I think if we're making the interpretation this doesn't count as a front yard fence, you probably do not need to formally make a motion on it. If you formally make a motion on it, you might be giving it a special exception.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's not technically in the technical definition of what a front yard is, then, like you
Yeah.
said, it's a non-issue.
Any other questions for the
Yeah,
ladies?
if we're done with the fence issue, I have another one. I didn't notice anything in any of the photos you provided of any outside lighting, any parking lot lighting or building lighting. Is there any?
There likely will be to meet city code. So whatever city code requirements are for parking lot lighting, we'll meet that. For building lighting, for safety, we'll do that as well, but we'll meet all of the code requirements regarding brightness, making sure that, you know, we don't have light spillage into adjacent properties. So again, that's in an advanced stage of development that we haven't studied right now that would typically be done at site plan.
Okay, I just want to read you something from your letter again. And this is on the front page, and it's not very specific, but let me read it anyway. On the front page of your letter, number 1, the last paragraph on that page, it says the proposed conditional use is compatible, and skipping down, it says lighting and glare, and so I just do want to make sure that you're very aware of the lighting and glare and getting off the property. So just wanted to raise that.
Yes, we'll be sure to comply with all codes regarding that.
That's actually a condition in section 5.07 performance standards of the land use code, that any exterior lighting shall be contained on the property. That's condition number 5, if we so choose to move on this.
Motions on this.
And I also noticed in your letter that there's no signage now, but there was talk about signage in the future. Can you address that?
That's something that might come later, and we would go through the standard permitting process for that. We don't typically include signage at this phase at site plan unless it's like a big monument sign. So that's why it's not specifically addressed.
Also on the sketches that you provide, I'm just curious, it says you'll be in the southern half of that 9 acres. How much? Is it divided in half? Do you have 1/3? Where does the line fall on all these pictures? Because there's nothing demarcating where the end of this particular project is going to be.
So basically the rear of the building is probably like 20 or 30 feet behind the building is where that kind of project would end, I would say. It gives the developer the opportunity for future phases if that's something that happens, I don't know. But right now, we're not planning to subdivide that lot. We just put the development on the southern half of that 9 acre.
So of the 9 acres, how many acres will this building encompass?
That's a good question. Sorry, I have it in my notes somewhere.
It's just not very specific at all, that's what I'm trying to get at.
No, it's not. I would just guess that it's probably around an acre, acre and a half. Yeah.
And then your plan is to keep, the Pinion will hold on to the other 8 acres then, is that?
Well, they own all of the property.
Right, but you're gonna hold on-
So the entire parcel is theirs.
You said you're not going to subdivide it, you're going to hang on to it?
No, we're not
Yeah.
subdividing it,
Right.
no.
And then I guess this question is for Tracy. It was mentioned several times, the extension of Driscoll Street. Is that like a for certain that Driscoll's going to go through this property, or what's the status of that? I've seen it mentioned several times in the packet.
So on the Chisholm plat, Driscoll, which would be the east-west running road parallel to Empire, is demarcated as a 60-foot access and utility easement for future Driscoll Street. So that is reserved to be Driscoll Street. It would be a developer's prerogative to extend it. The city potentially could say, we have this access easement for Driscoll Street, and pursue that with the landowner. But in this project is not triggering that requirement. So there's other mention of extending other portions of right-of-way north through the property, which is off-site of this particular applicant's land. So, and that's not a clear dedication as a street or right-of-way.
Okay, thank you. That was just for my education.
I did want to just say, I think the acreage, just multiplying your length, was more like 2.8 acres.
Yeah, 3 acres with the
Yeah.
parking lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Building and parking lot around 3 acres. Yeah.
And then again, on the photos, it doesn't note this at all, but I'm assuming there will be a sidewalk along Empire Street, along the whole front of the building, whole front of the property?
That's correct. And that's a code requirement as well. So all sidewalks will have safe circulation, both to and from the site and within the site.
Even just your standard homeowner is required to pour concrete per the city of Cortez.
Okay, thank you. I guess that's the end of all my questions. Thanks.
Jim, one more thing, on the memorandum from Tracy, it lists the square footage of the lot and the square footage required to build the property. So the residential units requires 126,000 square feet of land, and the total lot is approximately 399,445 square feet.
Does anybody else have any questions for the ladies?
Just one last one. Your property, the whole 9 acres, does not abut the city's Carpenter area? Is there another strip of land between you and Carpenter, or does your property actually abut the city's Carpenter area?
We don't think it abuts directly. I don't know. I don't have a parcel map with me to show that.
Because this is all I have right here, and it's kind of hard to see, so I didn't
Yeah,
know.
that's more of like what's in the radius for people to walk to.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, ladies. So about the concept of approving the PUC, or CUP, sorry, you need an approval to be able to go forward with this, is that correct? Okay.
So I guess getting back to the parking issue, was it anyone's desire then to add something that we look at parking for the office space, or was anyone going to propose that or not?
We can handle that in a motion right now. Are we still in public hearing?
We're still in public hearing.
Shall we?
So anybody else to speak for or against? Okay, we'll close public hearing. Commissioners have any further items of discussion?
I think that because there is a gray area, it would appear to me in our land use code in regard to how this should be delineated, because it is going to be residential and office under one roof. I mean, we're talking about the addition of one, maybe two parking spaces. If we want to set a precedence here that for any, we're going to keep that delineated, I don't think that that's going to be a burden on the developer to add such a small amount, and to keep that per what the land use code currently says. We have this many units, this many spaces per, and then if there's 300 square feet of office space, you have one parking spot. So can we add that as a condition of our motion?
So, yeah, I was gonna say, so your suggestion is to add it
I'm gonna make it number 6.
as a number 6, and
Correct.
just say that the appropriate number of parking spots as per land use code.
Correct.
Okay.
That would be what I would. All right. Mr. Chairman, or I guess, rather, I jumped ahead of you. He's supposed to ask us. I can make it? All right, wonderful. Mr. Chairman, I move to recommend approval of a conditional use permit to establish multifamily residential housing on a property located at TBD Empire Street in the residential multifamily R2 zone as submitted by Christian Pritchett of Blue Line Development, Inc., agent for property owner Pinion Project through P&Z Resolution Number 1, Series 2022, with following conditions, 1 through 5, and additional condition number 6, stating that if there is office space, the appropriate number of parking spaces are added to the parking per the land use code square footage requirement of office space, while also honoring the number of parking spaces per unit. How was that?
Is there a second to the motion?
Second?
Would you read that motion back again? No, I'm just kidding. Any further discussion?
Number 6 is to allow for appropriate number of parking spaces to include the office space. Is my note on it that I will have to review the video.
Because, yeah, to address the land use code you had in there, I know. You had those words in there, but she takes the minutes off
Okay.
the recorded
Based,
video.
if I'm going to make a really Cliff Notes version of it, that the residential parking spaces per unit be honored while also honoring the number of spaces required for office space included in the project. Is that better?
Those Cliff Notes will work, yeah.
Okay. The first one was rather wordy.
We have a motion, and we're going to take a second on that. Any further discussion? Let's call for a vote then.
Squarts,
Yes.
Candelaria,
Yes.
McDaniel,
Yes.
Levy,
Yes.
Remy.
Yes. Thank you for everyone. Next item, which I quite figured out this is really on there, but anyway, citizens' participation. Anybody want to say anything to the commissioners? Please come forward, and I'm not seeing anyone, so we'll move on to the next P&Z. Any discussion items?
I feel bad. I think I threw the minutes thing off the tracks, because when I look at the approval of minutes, P&Z meeting December 2021 on the agenda, should we, I mean, my comments were just about the work session and not the regular minutes, which I was totally fine with. I'm just throwing that out, just so you know. I don't know if we want to go back and just approve those and split them.
I was gonna ask that question as well. I realize I don't have a vote in the minutes
Well,
of the
it's-
regular meeting, but, and I'm gonna abstain if we have to approve minutes of a workshop, because I'll be honest with you, I heard every other word.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? But
Yeah.
nevertheless, I mean, if you guys are good with the minutes of the prior meeting,
Yeah.
do you really have to wait to approve those minutes?
Yeah, I don't think so.
I'm more familiar with the workshop being summary
Yeah,
of discussions, and it's not really included in the minutes of the meeting.
right. And maybe that's my whole, I didn't mean to derail everything. I apologize.
Well, it was early on, so I guess if the commissioners would like to go back to number 2, and, is that for next meeting? Go back to number 2, and any discussion on the minutes of that meeting. Not the work session, just the meeting. I'd entertain a motion then to accept the minutes.
I so move.
Lance moves, is there a second?
There's a second.
Jim seconds. Call for question, we'll vote.
Candelaria?
This is in regard to the
Oh, yeah.
prior meeting?
The
Yeah,
minutes?
it's the meeting that you weren't at, so you got it.
Yeah, so I abstain. I don't get a vote.
McDaniel?
Yes.
Levy?
Yes.
Squarts?
Yes.
Remy?
Yes. And I don't know, well, I got a note here, and it could come out under other items of business later on, but we need to have an election of officers, which isn't on the agenda, so we should probably put that on the agenda for next meeting. So Cheryl, make sure that is on as an item of business. Any other discussion items or items of business?
I have a quick question, particularly for Tracy. If there is a residential R2 property that is less than 6,000 square feet, how does somebody go about putting a single-family residence on that when the land use code states that you have to have a minimum of a 6,000 square foot lot to do so?
If it was platted and the subdivision improvements were put in, so all the, infrastructure's there and, there's other houses in the neighborhood, you could get a building permit. It would be called non-conforming.
Okay.
But if it was platted, but then the streets weren't put in and the, utilities weren't put in, then it goes into this kind of, if then, what's the exact situation, legal territory.
Gotcha.
It doesn't have to go through the variance process if your lot is smaller?
No, it's covered in the non-conforming section. So if like a legal lot of record that was platted and everybody did what they were supposed to do at the time, they become legal. There is a consolidation clause, so if you own contiguous non-conforming lots, they get consolidated by the land use code, which was a case law not that long ago in Wisconsin that was upheld. Yeah.
So essentially, I hate this term, but essentially it would be grandfathered in, for lack of
Yeah.
better terms.
Yeah, it says, a single-family dwelling and customary accessory buildings may be developed on a lot that has less area than the minimum required by the underlying zone district and was an official lot of record prior to the adoption of the city's original zoning ordinance. And then it goes into a bunch of stuff. But the original zoning ordinance part, I think we must have had a 6,000 square foot minimum after that. But that piece I'm not real sure about.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Any of the other comments for the good of the cause, other than once you get to be a grandfather, you'll understand things change?
I would just like to say what a pleasant surprise it was to see Tracy here again tonight. Thank you.
No problem.
I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Got a motion and a second. Proceed to vote.
Squirts,
Yes.
McDaniel, Candelaria,
Yes.
Levy,
No, just kidding, yes.
Remy.
Yes. Meeting adjourned.